Good morning and welcome to Rising. Thank you for tuning in. I'm again joined by Michael Starr Hopkins. Welcome.
Good to be here.
Great to have you. Let's get into it. It's a consequential day, of course, for President Joe Biden. He's going to be giving a rare unscripted press conference later today at, I believe, 6:30 p.m. to a crowd of journalists. Every utterance, stumble, and pause will, of course, be analyzed. Now, Biden has been hosting 38 world leaders so far this week, marking the 75th anniversary of NATO. Calls for the president to step aside, however, do continue. Vermont Senator Peter Welch became the first Senate Democrat to outright call for Biden to drop out. Welch wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post yesterday titled, "Biden should withdraw for the good of the country." Let's take a listen to Democratic Senators Dick Durbin and Richard Blumenthal speaking about it yesterday.
How concerned are you about his chances in November?
I'm very concerned. It's going to be a close race, and we already knew that.
But, I mean, you have to be concerned about his viability, aren't you?
I am deeply concerned about Joe Biden winning this November because it is an existential threat to the country if Donald Trump wins. So I think that we have to reach a conclusion as soon as possible.
Plus, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has privately signaled to donors he's open to a Democratic ticket that is not led by Biden. That's according to reporting from Axios.
Meanwhile, actor George Clooney, who has long supported and been one of Biden's biggest donors, also called for Biden to drop out, which is what prompted MSNBC's Joe Scarborough to say this morning. Let's watch.
Let's say one thing that we do have to underline here, just so viewers can follow what's going on behind the scenes, is the Biden campaign and many Democratic officials do believe that Barack Obama is quietly working behind the scenes to orchestrate this.
So Obama is orchestrating calls for Biden to drop out of the race, apparently. But Joe's not the only MSNBC anchor who's changed his tune on Biden. Take a listen to anchor Chris Hayes.
Clooney's observations are not unique. Joe Biden is a decent man who, like I said, has done nothing wrong. He hasn't been caught in a scandal. He is just aging. And that reality makes him, I think, increasingly likely to lose re-election to a Republican candidate.
And it's not just lawmakers in the mainstream media signaling Biden to step aside. A new ABC News Washington Post Ipsos poll found 2/3 of Americans, including a majority of Biden's own supporters, Democrats, say he should step aside as his party's presumptive nominee. But Trump world hasn't been as focused on attacking Biden. Instead, they've been seemingly shifted their attention to attacking Vice President Kamala Harris. Here he is at a Florida rally yesterday.
But whatever else can be said about crooked Joe Biden, you have to give him credit for one brilliant decision, probably the smartest decision he's ever made. He picked Kamala Harris as his vice president. No, it was brilliant. Because it was an insurance policy, maybe the best insurance policy I've ever seen, Marco. If Joe had picked someone even halfway competent, they would have bounced him from office years ago.
Meanwhile, the GOP's Oversight Committee subpoenaed 3 White House aides Wednesday, demanding that they sit for depositions over President Biden's mental health, according to Axios.
And that's part of this feeling now that we all have that everyone knew about Biden's decline and not only was silent about it, but demonized people for asking questions about it. You know, this George Clooney op-ed, which we talked about on the show yesterday toward the end of our show, now that I've had more time to kind of like think it through and see what the reaction is.
It's pretty troubling.
He hosted the fundraiser that Biden participated in a month ago. Obama was there. Jimmy Kimmel moderated this conversation, and Clooney interacted with Biden there. That was the video footage that was part of the rapid succession of 3 videos that were described by Karine Jean-Pierre and other Biden defenders as cheap fakes, as manipulated videos that were designed to make you think there's something wrong with Biden even though there's not. It was footage from that event. Now here we are a month later, George Clooney, who hosted the event and interacted with Joe Biden, and everyone else who was there, according to Jon Favreau and David Axelrod. They said this on MSNBC yesterday, or CNN, one of the channels. They said they were there and that everyone who interacted with Biden had the same thought. Oh my God, holy SHIT, he can't do this anymore. But that was a month ago. We endured an entire media cycle of the Biden defenders screaming at us that there's nothing wrong with Biden, and everyone in the media then portraying Republicans as dishonest and liars for saying there was something wrong, when behind the scenes, all the Biden people who were there are like, oh yeah, he's totally has a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why you're seeing...
It's a deception.
Well, it's why you're seeing such a rabid response, not just from the press, but even from Biden defenders. You know, I wrote a column right after the midterm saying Biden should step aside, he's got goodwill, all those kind of things, and it was heavily criticized at the time. Now, you know, moving forward, we have the same situation come about where people start talking about how we need to have a conversation about his health and mental health. And the campaign and the administration does the same thing. They attack people. It's going to be really interesting.
They do attack people.
It's personal too. It's not just, you know, a substantive thing. It's a personal attack.
Right.
It's going to be interesting to see this afternoon at the press conference how the press goes after Biden when they get the chance to ask him one-on-one questions.
Karine Jean-Pierre and her ilk, they were deceitful about Biden's state. They were deceitful. And then the mainstream media was either not curious enough to properly investigate that, or they were complicit in foisting this cover-up on the American people. It's now undeniable, and yes, the press has absolutely turned on Biden, and now they're looking for the truth. If you watch CNN, they're having none of it now. But that's going to be, it's still going to be too little too late for, I know, for a lot of conservatives who are watching and saying, but we've been saying this, we've been calling attention to this for forever, and we were told it was manipulated images. This whole thing is going to be another example, like with Russiagate, like with the laptop story, some COVID stuff, of the mainstream media having lost credibility and faith with a lot of Americans because of how they treated this issue.
Well, and now they're going to have to spend the next 120 days basically trying to relitigate this as long as Biden's on the top of the ticket. And that's really the big problem for Democrats. As long as he's on the top of the ticket, the media feels like they have to now course correct and overcorrect because of the job that was done previously. Yeah. He cannot be at the top of the ticket at this point. And you can kind of see the panic coming in from Trump now with the idea that the VP may be the new nominee.
Despite what he said there, it seems clear that Trump wants to run against Biden.
Absolutely.
They do not want Biden to go. They see the polling. They know that they're in a pretty good position, that Trump is in a pretty good position versus Biden right now. No reason to rock the boat. From their perspective, let's not do anything differently. We have a strong chance. Let's just proceed ahead as planned to November. They don't want Kamala at the top of the ticket. Although they could very well, based on the polling, Trump would also be likely to beat Kamala Harris or anyone else.
I think that the attacks on Kamala that he's going to do, kind of the racially tinged thing that Trump does, that's like his shtick, it is going to cause African Americans and young people to turn out in Obama-esque numbers. Just watching that clip made me wish that she jumped in the race so she can wipe the floor with them. There's a protective sense around her for even people who haven't been big supporters of her. Trump going after her, I think, is just going to light a fire under Democrats' asses.
I think that theoretically could be correct, but it's not going to come to pass because Joe Biden is not going anywhere. I'm sticking to my prediction. He has no reason
by hell or high water, Joe Biden will not be the nominee.
No, it would take an act of God. That's what he said. The Almighty must come down from heaven and tell Joe Biden he's got to get out of the race, and that's not going to happen.
He's giving him the boat and the oars, so it's time for Biden to row his way out.
I don't think it's going to happen. Obviously, tonight is very important for Joe Biden. If he does a really good job, I think he might be able to staunch the bleeding. I don't expect him to do a really good job.
But the problem is the bleeding is never going to
anymore.
Stop. Like maybe he stops it tonight, but then he's going to rip the stitches out 2 days from now when he misspeaks. And every day, people are just waiting.
But he just has to hold on. He doesn't have to do anything. He should stop, frankly. From his perspective, he should stop doing media appearances entirely. He should cancel the next debate. He never should have done this debate in the first place. He should just hole up in the basement. And like his delegates, as far as we can tell, I've looked at reporting on the delegates at the convention. They're bound by good conscience to vote for him, so they don't actually legally have to vote for him. But the reporting so far has been, and this could change.
And they've been calling the delegates.
The delegates are saying, with rare exception, they're still voting for Biden. And so if that's it. But that's it. It's still going to happen
until they're not. It's like every other scandal. It's like, look at when Governor Cuomo, he wasn't going to leave, he wasn't going to leave, he wasn't going to leave until he leaves. That's how no politician just voluntarily walks out.
That is a rare example in our modern times of someone actually leaving, right? Generally, they don't leave.
I mean, look at Al Franken. Al Franken,
he regrets leaving. If that happened today, he would have never in a million years left. If that same exact scandal happened to him today, he would say, go to hell, I'm not leaving.
But Democrats...
That was at the peak of we can still force people out for sex-related scandals.
I will be I don't know if impressed is the word, but if Democrats hold the line like Republicans do, that will be a game changer for, I think, how Democrats operate. That's not our MO. We are an emotional group. We operate off of emotion, and it's going to be interesting to see because I think he has spent so much goodwill at this point. I think the tide emotionally has turned on him. People are mad.
Yeah, I mean, the leaders of his party, but again, Trump has been in that exact same situation with the leaders of his party.
So Biden is going to become the new Trump?
Go F themselves. I mean, he is
Trumpian.
In his desperate effort to cling to power, he is behaving in a very Trump-esque way. And what we've learned from Trump is that can work.
It can.
That can absolutely work. There's no independent mechanism. We don't have accountability over these aging political leaders. Their conviction that they should stay in power is greater than the distributed conviction among other people that they should go. Their will to do it, it's not admirable. It's impressive.
The Morning Joe call, I guess, it was unsettling. To hear Joe Biden call into Morning Joe, it reminded me of Trump so much. Yeah. I got goosebumps about it. Yeah. That's not where Democrats are at. If we're at a point now where we're starting to mimic Trump behavior to stay into power, then there's got to be some soul searching.
This man, Joe Biden, has wanted to be the president for 40 years.
He did it. He got it.
He got it.
Okay.
Well, but he can do it again.
But he can't.
He thinks he can.
Yeah.
He's convinced he can.
And I think at this point he's the only person.
And his wife is convinced he can, and Hunter Biden is convinced that, he might as well try.
Why not? I'll give it my goodest try.
Why not? Goodest try.
My goodest try.
We're all going to make our goodest try here today on Rising. Much more of our show to come. Stick around.
With President Biden digging in and vowing to stay on the ballot, many Democrats in close races are worrying about the impact on their race. Rep. Adam Schiff, who is running for a California Senate seat, summed it up this week when he spoke out on Meet the Press. Let's watch.
Are Democrats in trouble with Joe Biden at the top of the ticket?
Look, there are concerns with the impact on down ballot races if the president doesn't do well.
Is he dragging down ballot races as we speak?
At present, our down ballot candidates in the Senate and House are doing well. They're all ahead. They are running well ahead of the president. But you can only run so far ahead of the president. And so obviously Joe Biden is going to need to consider for his own sake and his own legacy, can he beat Donald Trump? He's the best to beat Donald Trump. But also the profound impact this decision, maybe the most important of his presidency, will have on the House, on the Senate, on the future of the country.
Some Democratic strategists are trying to attract funding from big donors who say they're no longer going to kick into Biden's war chest specifically. This is, of course, a complicated dance. Many political scientists say voters these days tend to vote for a party over individual candidates. Here to unpack all of this and delve into the races at risk is Democratic strategist Kevin Walling. Great to have you with us, Kevin.
Robbie, Michael, good to see you.
Yes, nice little Fox News reunion. We used to be on the Kennedy's
We may have to give Kennedy a little call.
We look better with purple.
That's right. So give us your lowdown on what's going on. I still say no way is Biden getting out, but am I becoming increasingly Pollyanna-ish about this?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we have to remember this is a guy who got elected to the Senate at 30, has wanted to be president ever since then, has run any number of times for the presidency, finally has that. And in the history of this country, we haven't seen many incumbent presidents willingly give that up. And again, he's got his team around him. I don't know if they're having the honest conversations that we'd like them necessarily to have. In that Stephanopoulos interview, he talked about polls that he's seeing. I don't know if it's dug in.
What polls are those?
Exactly right. Yeah. So, I mean, he makes reference to these polls all the time in terms of where he's up. Since the debate, not a lot of the ground has shifted, actually, but it's pretty clear in a lot of these battleground states that it's a much more difficult path.
By team around him, let's be clear on who we mean. We mean Jill Biden and Hunter Biden. So let's get into the specific down ballot races. It looks to me like, counterintuitively, it has not been, we discussed this yesterday, the very left, very progressive people so far who have already had a combative relationship with Biden. You might have expected them to be turning on him. But the people raising the most concern right now are those more centrist Dems who are in losable races, swing swing district races. How are they feeling?
Yeah, Robbie, it's a great point. I mean, the fact that you saw Congresswoman AOC out there with a pretty supportive response to the president's standing is interesting. Now you're seeing some folks like Michael Bennet, senator from Colorado. He's not up in cycle, but John Tester and Sherrod Brown, Ohio and Montana certainly are, giving indications that they want to see the president actually perform better out there, make the case to the American people, because I think there is some fear in terms of the down ballot aspect. Again, also polls, new poll out of Wisconsin, right, shows the president losing by 5 points, but Tammy Baldwin winning by the same margin by 5 points over her Republican challenger. So there is that dynamic, and we've seen that play out where the president's standing isn't necessarily tied to incumbent standing in terms of some of these key races, whether it be Arizona with Ruben Gallego, Tammy Baldwin, as I mentioned, in Wisconsin, Sherrod Brown. Ohio, there is that disconnect where the president isn't so much of a drag that we've seen just yet on those down ballot races.
Democrats have a chance to have the first black speaker in Hakeem Jeffries, but if the president stays on the ticket and brings the entire ticket down, basically, that's going to be an opportunity squandered. How much longer do you think the CBC sticks with President Biden, given the opportunity they may miss out on?
Yeah, Michael, it's a really good point. You know, and that was one of the buoys to the president's standing. He obviously had that call earlier in the week with them. Both the CBC, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, have come out strongly for the president. But there is that dynamic with Hakeem. There are some forecasts that show that the Democrats are less positioned to take back the House. That's all we talked about for the last year, is that Democrats are likely to take back the House, Republicans likely to take back the Senate, given some of the dynamics in some of these states. You're seeing, to your point, Michael, some of these frontliners also making waves, a handful of them, Angie Craig in Minnesota, some others that have Earl Blumenauer, for example, that are in tighter races, distancing themselves. There's indications that the former speaker is saying, you know, as we know, she's a just win, baby. You know, if you got to come out against me, as we remember in previous cycles, just win, baby. So she's given some leeway, some breath to some of those folks to distance themselves from the president. She's also said, you know, we've got to finish up NATO today. The press conference has moved back to 6:30, and we'll see what happens tomorrow when folks are leaving town, if they kind of release a statement and hop on the plane back to their district.
I mean, she said, Nancy Pelosi yesterday, you know, asked about Biden over and over again. She kept saying, what's his decision to make? It's his decision to make. I'm thinking, he made the decision.
He already made it 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
So is that her way of saying? And there's a little bit of a mob-esque. I know you'll do the right thing. Like, is the right thing for him to get out? Tim Kaine said that yesterday. Our News Nation people interviewed him, and he said, "I know he'll do the right thing. I know he'll do the patriotic thing for this country." That sounds to me like some indirect pressure from some prominent Dems, Nancy Pelosi, former Speaker of the House.
Sure.
Tim Kaine, we don't remember it, but was the
VP nominee in
2016.
Hillary Clinton. Yeah. Is that going to have any bearing on what he does?
Well, we forget, you know, Nancy Pelosi, we think, you know, San Francisco, but she got her Baltimore baby, right? So the question about the mom, I don't think there's as good as that. But coming from that kind of family in Baltimore, where it's all about vote counting, and we know that's what her tenure as Speaker was all about. You know, both her and Leader Schumer are focused on their races, right? They would like to have a Democratic president, but at the end of the day, they want a majority for both those caucuses. And I think they're, again, giving some breath to that. We saw indications that Chuck Schumer, on some calls with donors, is leaving the door open potentially for a replacement for the president. Now, Michael, we talked about this too. It's got to be, you know, likely the vice president. You know, you can't skip over the first black woman vice president on the ticket from a financial standpoint too, just in terms of how the party operates with resources, that they're on these joint victory committees with state parties. It's got to be her. And again, she's out there campaigning as well. You know, she was in Nevada, in Texas. I think she's in North Carolina today. So she's still kind of under the radar doing that base engagement work, but it's got to be her if not the president.
Let me ask you about donors real quick. You know, people calling for the president to get out may not work, but if donors cut off funds, is that really the thing that'll drive the president? Because without money, it's not just his race that'll go down. The entire Democratic Party apparatus would go down.
Yeah, it's a great point. And funny enough, we've seen a rise in grassroots donations to the party since the debate. I think 33 million or something like that, the best month that they've seen on record in June. But to your point, Michael, it's all about the bundlers, right? So that you've seen this rise in grassroots donors, people saying we got the back of the president. That operation is already going full steam. But then it is a question of all these people that want to be ambassadors in the second term that are bundling hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. Saw that letter from George Clooney, that op-ed. He's one of those bundlers. If that's the case, that you're starting to lose steam with the people that really power the mechanics of this party operation.
Yeah, Ari Emanuel came out a couple days ago.
Yeah.
Said the same thing.
Yeah, I think I saw reporting yesterday that Katzenberg had begged Clooney not to do that op-ed in the New York Times because that was going to be so devastating given Clooney's role as a fundraise hauler for the Democrats.
Yeah, we talk about his celebrity status and stuff like that, but George Clooney and his wife have been huge donors and backers to the president. Headlined in that op-ed that he talked about, that $30 million haul in LA just a few weeks ago for the president. So he's coming at it from that approach, not necessarily a celebrity approach. Obviously, he's got the name, so we all talk about it.
Yeah.
But at this point, you also got to win the day every day, right? So the president, I talked about, had a good day with the CBC Hispanic Caucus on Monday, Tuesday, but struggled a bit yesterday with that op-ed, with Speaker Pelosi's comments on Morning Joe, with the reports of Chuck Schumer behind the scenes. So again, all eyes are on this press conference.
Yes, he's going to have
today
another...
at 6:30. If he can win the day-to-day, stem a little bit of the bleeding heading into the weekend.
Yeah, he's going to have that chance, like you said, tonight at 6 to improve morale among Democrats and reassure people that he can get through the most basic confrontational, hostile questioning.
The beatings will not stop until morale improves.
Even then, they might not stop. All right, stay tuned for more Rising right after this. The Daily Wire's Ben Shapiro got into it with Democratic Representative Eric Swalwell on the House floor on Wednesday. Now, Shapiro was testifying before the House Judiciary Committee to talk about the allegations that an advertising coalition called the Global Alliance for Responsible Media was colluding to suppress conservative voices under the guise of brand safety. Here's Shapiro explaining that theory. Let's watch.
We're in the midst of a trust crisis in the world of media, which is because so many in the legacy media have lied in order to preserve left-leaning narratives. To take just the most recent example, we were told by the legacy media that President Biden was just fine. For years, anyone who questioned his health and mental fitness was trafficking in cheap fakes. And then President Biden went out and engaged in a full-scale mental collapse on stage in front of hundreds of millions of people. So we can see why Americans, at least Americans who are not Democrats, do not trust the media. The question isn't really why the legacy media have lost Americans' trust. We know that answer. The question is why, despite that loss of trust, the legacy media continue to gain share in the advertising market. And the answer is simple. There is, in fact, an informal pressure system created by Democratic legislators, this White House, legacy media, advertisers, and pseudo-objective brand safety organizations. That system guarantees that advertising dollars flow only to left-wing media brands.
During the hearing, Representative Swalwell took the opportunity to press Shapiro on his views about a bunch of subjects, including Project 2025, a proposed plan drafted by the Heritage Foundation that outlines a series of policies they want Trump to embrace while in office. Let's watch.
How much do you support Project 2025?
I think, like President Trump, I haven't looked all that deeply at Project 2025, but it seems that Democrats on this committee, sort of like Peter Pan and Tinkerbell, if they say Project 2025 enough, their presidential candidate becomes alive again.
Swalwell also pressed Ben Shapiro on some other comments, including things he said about homosexual activity.
You did say, I think homosexual activity is a sin.
Yes, I'm a religious Jew,
I'm
that's
sure
true.
There's a genetic component.
You found me out.
Orientation. But the view of all religious people I know has always been that sexual behavior is something that is up to you. And you said, I may have a desire to sleep with many women, but I do not.
I agree with me. Yes, that's true.
Congratulations on your, I'm sure it's very hard to restrain yourself.
Swalwell also grilled Shapiro on his thoughts about banning the abortion pill, to which Shapiro said it was actually a state-by-state issue. Now, reacting to all of this, Elon Musk tweeted, quote, having seen the evidence unearthed today by Congress, X has no choice but to file suit against the perpetrators and collaborators in the advertising boycott racket. Hopefully, some states will consider criminal prosecution. So some amusing moments from Ben Shapiro's testifying there. The issue at hand is this idea that these watchdog agencies, there's truth to it. I've tangled with them before. There was something called the Global Disinformation Index. It's this web of nonprofits, some of them even State Department funded, that rate and rank news sites and say this is an unsafe site and advertisers should not work with them. They have targeted conservative sites. They've targeted me as a writer at Reason Magazine, where I also work. We were on some list of the most risky, dangerous sites because they were saying we didn't cite things properly. It was totally wrong, totally made up. We asked what their criteria was. They were opaque about it. It's bad. It's nonsense. Media organizations should not be listening to a lot of these so-called independent watchdog groups. So now whether this is
a conspiracy.
Well, it's a conspiracy. Whether it's something Congress needs to concern itself with is probably where you lose me. But I think it's absolutely correct to call out these fact-checking, anti-misinformation watchdog organizations that say they're neutral and they're just warning advertisers about what sites they should not work with. And then you look at what are they actually saying this site did wrong? And especially with COVID, there's so much of they were peddling the conspiracy theory that it could have originated from a lab, which is a racist anti-China conspiracy. Like, is it?
See, here's the thing. This is where I think we get into a conversation about how tone versus substance. So, when Donald Trump used language about Asians when talking about COVID, it absolutely peddled in a lot of racist theories. Now, are there questions about whether or not the COVID came out of Wuhan labs and all that kind of stuff? I think that's where we should have been exploring. Yeah. But the tone of the conversation made it impossible to have any of that.
I think it's racist to say we got COVID because Chinese people were eating bats or whatever, or pangolins, or the weird Chinese cultural culinary practices in markets caused the pandemic. It's a far more, if it's true, it's true. So who cares if it's we just must deal with the truth, even if it plays into racial stereotypes. But that is the theory of COVID's origin that involves racial stereotyping, not the one that experiments were being done in unsafe lab conditions that were funded by the U.S. It's the intersectional theory is the one that it came from a lab.
But if you ask,
it was totally backwards the entire time that you were called racist if you thought it came from a lab, but you were not called racist if you thought it came from this specifically Asian food practice.
But doesn't it really talk about the broader media landscape, that the ability to actually get information, to understand the root of things so that people can have conversations, be informed? It's really hard. We're pretty informed people, and we've got to read 10, 15, 20 different sources to be able to get information. The average person doesn't really have the time or the desire to do that kind of groundwork. And so, what do they do?
That's a problem for democracy. Well, they gotta trust the talking heads they see on TV. I always encourage people who want to stay casually informed to seek multiple news sources always. And if you watch a lot of Fox, you should flip over to CNN sometimes. And if you're watching a lot of MSNBC, you should flip over to Fox.
Yeah, I don't agree with Ben Shapiro on very much, but I think it's important to watch some of the things that he says and watch some of the things that you hear over at Young Turks and really kind of put it all together and get this mosaic.
So what were we to make of that? Eric Swalwell, he's I don't know,
Eric Swalwell, he's never avoided a camera.
Right.
But I do think it's interesting to have Swalwell and
then he was grilling Ben Shapiro about things that Ben Shapiro is not embarrassed to say that he thinks, that are just conservative positions.
And it's why the average American never watches any congressional hearing, because it's all television. It is those clips are made exactly so that people will click on them for clickbait.
And he was implying that Ben Shapiro's lusty or something.
Ben Shapiro may be a lot of things, but lusty
and tempted by other women.
It's why people hate Congress. It's why people don't have a lot of faith in media, because it just ends up so personal. There's no one there was trying to get to any answers, any substantive.
Not Eric Swalwell, that's for sure. That was some funny clips. Anyway, I do hope that there's greater scrutiny of this. Again, vast web of sometimes State Department. If it's government funded, then yes, it is the purview of Congress to say. And the State Department, because I did do some research on this, because as I said, one of the magazines I write for was targeted, that the State Department had made grants to this British nonprofit that was labeling U.S. media companies that it disagreed with on COVID as purveyors of misinformation and risky sites that advertisers should not work with. That kind of business should not be. They can say whatever they want to say about us. It should not be funded by the federal government. The taxpayers should not be paying for their own. Should not be paying a British organization to encourage censorship of American media companies. What is going on?
It does get to a very...
I did that in a Tucker cadence. What is going on?
It gets to the really broader problem of like government being involved in censorship. And there's this very fine line of you want to make sure that disinformation isn't driving kind of the narrative in the country. Yeah. But you also, having government influence in media is problematic in and of itself. I have to actually say I've been really critical of Elon Musk and X. I have really enjoyed Community Notes and the addition that it's
Hell
made
yes,
to
love
Twitter.
Community Notes.
It allows people to kind of take in any information they want, but they have something to check and be able to see whether or not it's factual or not. I rarely praise Elon, but I think it's something that is something we can see maybe being done across other media.
I brought this up many times when we talk about what's happened to X. Community Notes is a great feature. It allows for collaborative, community-driven fact-checking, which is not always perfect, it's not always right, but is clearly the best model for fact-checking. Works so much better than having, like what Facebook does is they just picked, 15 or 20 independent organizations, most of them left-wing, to do all the fact-checking on the site. And those organizations get it wrong all the time. I've had articles I've written that have been wrongly labeled as false or misinformation.
And there's a financial incentive.
And then they've admitted they're wrong.
Yeah.
Then they admit they're wrong.
Yeah, we need to take the financial incentive out of it. When you have the Community Notes where it's the people really going in and kind of doing the information, I think that's really...
it's democratic.
It's democratic, and I think it rebuilds trust. We really have to rebuild trust in the media.
Yes, indeed. All right, more Rising right after this. Congress may have to stop trading stocks. Imagine that for them. A bipartisan group of senators struck a deal that would ban members of Congress, their spouses, and dependent children, as well as the president and vice president, from purchasing and selling stocks while in office. Congress should not be here to make a buck. There is no reason why members of Congress ought to be profiting off of the information that only they get, said Republican Senator Josh Hawley yesterday. Now, this bill was unveiled by Republicans Josh Hawley and Gary Peters and Democratic Senators Jeff Merkley and John Ossoff. Gary Peters, also a Democrat. The proposal comes after years of Congress trying to pass legislation to limit lawmakers' ability to profit from stocks and what could be insider tips.
Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi expressed her opposition to a congressional stock trading ban proposal in 2021. Quote, "We are a free market economy. They shouldn't be able to participate in that, or that should be able to participate in that, rather." Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi, has a history of making large and profitable stock trades. A Business Insider investigation from last year found 78 members of Congress in violation of the Stock Act, which requires public disclosure by themselves and family members within 45 days of purchase.
So this is something that I would be very happy to see become law. So would the vast majority of Americans, I presume.
But it never will.
But it never will.
It never will.
It seems so obvious that, yes, that government political figures should not be able to profit from information that they and they alone possess in their role
duties,
as people who set the rules for financial institutions and for the market. It's not, and Nancy Pelosi is totally wrong there about it. Well, it's a free market, so they should be able, yes, I am for free markets. Yep. I absolutely am a believer in the power of free markets and that people should be allowed to participate in them, but not the literal referees of the market. Like, that's the whole idea of government, which I have a problem with anyway, but is that they set some restrictions on what you're able to do in the market, ostensibly for the good of us all, although, again, I have a lot of questions about that. But then they don't need to be involved in the market. They could just be private citizens and then they can participate in it. But while they're in government, and probably for a while after, they should not be able to use information. Like, they prosecute you. You get in trouble if you have insider information, which is actually a made-up thing in my view anyway. But they're the only ones who can do it. They can do actual insider trading and get away with it.
Yeah, I think nothing weakens institutions and democracy more than a lack of faith in the system, the belief that the game is rigged. And so many Americans watch members of Congress come in, in their 30s or 40s, spend 30 or 40 more years in the job, and come out with tens of millions of dollars. And they're supposed to only be having a salary of, $200,000. That is not just frustrating, but I think at the root of it is how Donald Trump really came to power. It's that belief that the game is rigged, that people can profit off of the institution, and the average person can't.
Yeah, it's gotta be limited. This is a kind of common sense reform that if you polled Republicans, Democrats, independents, they would say, yeah, of course we don't think members of Congress should be profiting while in office. And they continuously get caught doing so. There were a couple Republican lawmakers who got caught making massive stock transfers.
There were a bunch during
right
COVID.
before COVID. In the pharmaceutical industry sales. Nancy Pelosi's husband has, I think, is a big. She represents Silicon Valley, and he's been an investor in major tech companies. She's owned stock in Facebook, despite the need, according to many Democrats, to regulate Facebook. And Trump wants to put Mark Zuckerberg in jail. There's some stuff in here for the national political landscape that's relevant to Facebook. And she was at one point the chief of the lawmakers. It's crazy.
I was talking to Mick Mulvaney yesterday on News Nation, and he raised an interesting point. When he went from Congress into the administration, he was required to take all of his stock and put it into mutual funds and S&Ps. And it seems like that should be the basic thing that anyone who's serving in public office should do. Put it in a public trust, put it in mutual funds. And, this is actually going to be a big issue for Donald Trump and his family should he win the election in November, because they've expanded their portfolio and are building towers in Saudi Arabia now and Albania. There's a conversation with Orbán that's happening that's happening today about future plans. How do we get around kind of this idea?
Well, and the Trump children have said they want to play no role. Well, I don't know about Don Jr. and Eric and Lara, but Jared Kushner and Ivanka, who were such main advisors to Trump last time around, said they're not in for another run.
Yeah, I mean, the Kushners walked away with a $2 billion deal with the Saudis after Trump left office. This commingling of business and profits, I think, it's not just problematic now. There's this really big fear, I think, among voters that we're going to get into this oligarchy kind of system where there's just 10 families running everything and kind of passing down small amounts of wealth.
And then on the Biden side, the chief of staff de facto right now to Joe Biden appears to be Hunter Biden.
There was nothing more frustrating to me than when it got released that Hunter Biden was in the Oval Office as Joe Biden prepared to come out and speak about the Supreme Court. Like, as I've said before, I am a supporter of Joe Biden. I would vote for him if he is at the top of the ticket. But the decision making, the thought process of having Hunter, I get he's his son, but he had just been convicted of a federal crime. Like, you are president, and I know that people are going to say you're a father first, but you're not. Like, when you're president of the United States, you're the most powerful person in the world. You have a responsibility to protect everyone in the world, and you just can't do that. Like, that's just common sense.
Yeah, Hunter was recently convicted of gun crimes.
Yeah.
And should play no part in any decision making. And yet here he is. This was supposed to be some contrast between Biden and Trump, that Biden would not be calling on his family members in such an obviously nepotistic and corrupt way. And I get that Hunter Biden is not crafting policy the way Jared Kushner was, but the most important policy right now is whether Joe Biden continues on as president, and that decision is being largely made by his family members.
Yeah, and
nobody else can get through to him.
Exactly, and I think that's really the big problem. You saw Joe Biden's family really kind of leaked to the press how upset they were with the performance that he had, and blamed it on the staff and blamed it on Ron Klain and those people. There's nothing Ron Klain or anyone could have done in that debate prep to make him look better.
Yeah.
I mean, the only people that really could do anything are his family, and they've decided to double down. And now, it appears that the circle's gotten even smaller, and there's no ability to really get in or give any honest information or honest kind of hot takes to the extent where you're now seeing not Joe Biden go to the Democratic Senatorial Committee to talk today, but the campaign.
Back to the stock ban. So you don't think there's any way this would actually pass?
No, there's no world. I mean, if you're a member of Congress and you have the opportunity to profit off of stocks, you're not going to self-regulate yourself. There's no world where that happens. The self-interest?
It would be so politically popular to do it.
It would be.
They can't give up the money.
They got Josh Hawley and John Ossoff to agree on something.
Yeah.
What a world.
Yeah. Oh. All right. We will have more Rising right after this. Immigration consistently ranks as one of the top issues of the 2024 election. Last year, red states had enough of people pouring through the border. Texas Governor Greg Abbott engineered a plan to get border states to ship migrants to blue cities such as New York City, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. What was at first seen as a political stunt quickly became a wake-up call. Now today, the one thing both sides can agree on is that the border is a mess and something does need to be done about it. While policymakers duke out what can be done to fix the situation, people like whistleblower Tara Lee Rodas, who worked on the ground, had urgent concerns. She testified before Congress this week to outline how the policy mess has translated into an abuse and trafficking situation for children.
One key area of concern for Rodas was how gangs such as MS-13 were sponsoring kids and then launching them into a maze of abuse and horror. She says when she reported what she saw, her badge was taken. Health and Human Services whistleblower Tara Rodas is here now to shine a light on this situation. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you shining a light on what we now know is government-sponsored, taxpayer-funded child trafficking.
Yeah, when I was watching your testimony, you talked about how the things you saw had fundamentally changed your life. What are the horrors that Americans need to know about?
Well, I think the fact that the United States government has used billions of taxpayer dollars to put children in what is modern day slavery is appalling. It is shameful. And people just don't realize that the children who show up at the border alone, these children are here alone. They're very vulnerable. And then we're shipping them to criminals, traffickers, and members of transnational criminal organizations like MS-13 and 18th Street Gang and other cartels. Honestly, had I not seen it myself, I could not believe that the U.S. government has become the middleman in a child trafficking operation.
So when you say child trafficking operation, you're talking about what happens to them when they actually get here to the U.S. or the process of coming over the border?
Yeah, the process of them coming over the border. The children were telling us they were being recruited by bad actors here in the United States saying, hey, if you come here, instead of making $2.50 a day in Guatemala, this was a real case that I worked on. Instead of $2.50 a day, I'm going to pay you $6 an hour. Now you have to stay with me until your debts are paid. So the children we knew were in debt bondage. They were telling us that, and they were not able to leave the sponsor until the debts were paid.
What role does the immigration crisis play in cartels being able to move these children across the border?
That is a very great question that should be asked of the Secretary of DHS and HHS, because right now they're not information sharing at all. In the past, HHS would share the sponsor name with DHS, so they could actually look to see if these people were criminals. Now that information sharing has been completely cut off. So that's one major thing that has contributed to this crisis. The other thing is HHS, because they're not investigative, they're not law enforcement. They have no idea how to properly train people to look for trafficking concerns. So they have no business taking children into their care, releasing them into the United States to people they've never seen, to homes they've never visited. We would never allow this sort of horrific treatment to happen to children here in the United States. And we need to stand up. This is not a political issue. We need to stand up for these children. They have nobody. They have nobody once they get here. And many of them cannot even speak Spanish. So those who come here speaking Spanish have some help, right? We have some law enforcement and people who can speak Spanish, but many of these children speak Mayan dialects. They're very indigenous Mayan dialects like Quiche, Quechua, and Hmong. They have no way to ask for help. They become victims, captive victims of their sponsors. It's evil.
Where is Child Protective Services on this? Because that is an organization, it differs in the many states, goes by many different names, is often a very robust organization that does check in on a number of families in difficult situations with children and children in foster care and that kind of thing. Why are they not shining a light on this?
Because HHS is holding secret the names and locations of the sponsors of the children. It's unthinkable that there are attorney generals, like my attorney general in the state of Virginia, Jason Miyares, has been asking repeatedly. There are children. We have 22 children missing in a small town here in Virginia of Culpeper, and HHS refuses to give the critical information to the states that could save the children. HHS is holding this data hostage. They won't allow anyone to see it because they know once law enforcement and the states can see what's happened to the children, that there is no rug big enough in the universe to put this under.
When HHS let you go, what was their rationale and how did they justify that to you?
So what they claimed as cover for action. So I reported the first case of MS-13, of a known affiliated MS-13 actor on our site who was attempting to sponsor 2 young teenagers, 13 years old, one from our site and one from the Fort Bliss emergency intake site. As soon as I reported that case, that's when everything changed. I went from being, they appointed me to the deputy of the director for our case management team. I was highly trusted, highly valued in all of the top executive meetings. They valued my input. They brought me in on meetings with the Executive Office of the President, the U.S. Digital Service. But the moment I reported that MS-13 case, it took them less than 3 weeks to swiftly accuse me of wrongdoing, completely falsely, and then threaten me with investigation and walked me off the site with security. So HHS, ORR, their federal field specialist, which was one of the highest ranking HHS people on the site, along with security, had me clean out my belongings from my workspace in front of my peers midday. We call that the perp walk.
Yeah.
The walk of shame. They try to shame you in front of your peers while simultaneously scaring anybody else from coming forward. So they learned I made protected disclosures to Department of Justice, OIG, and HHS, OIG, and they outed me in front of everybody and then, falsely accused me of wrongdoing. It's absurd. They were trying to hide that they were knowingly, because they were aware. I advised them, this sponsor has known MS-13 gang affiliation, and they didn't want it to get out. So they decided to try to get rid of me instead.
It's incredible because you'd think the political upside of actually doing something about an MS-13 contact would be good for someone on either side of the political aisle. That the concerns about illegal immigration, about trafficking of children, does not need to be political at all, or people on both sides of the aisle obviously are against that and want something done about it. So you'd think a more muscular response to this problem could be a win, but here you are calling attention to it, and your former bosses in the Biden administration saying, no, keep this quiet.
Yeah, it really is astounding because I volunteered to support the Biden administration with this crisis at the border. As a Spanish speaker, my husband is from El Salvador. I've been to Guatemala, Mexico, El Salvador, and I thought I can be there to help the children. And once we realized they were trafficking them in June of 2021 is when we started reporting that, I begged, I appealed. I said, look, no one is going to blame you if you sound the alarms. I said, just sound the alarms and say, look, bad actors have figured out ways to exploit our program. They are using name fraud, address fraud. They are sponsoring from one apartment. There's like 3 sponsors in one apartment. We have children, like 40 children going to an apartment building. I said, look, if you sound the alarm, you can be the hero. Be the hero. Call in the big guns, call FBI, call Homeland Security investigations, please. I said, no one is going to blame you for sounding the alarm. And they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it.
It's so sad. It feels like there's a willful turning of a blind eye to this. And there's not, like you said, people who can really stand up and vouch for these children because they're in a country that they're unfamiliar from. What would your message be to HHS moving forward?
Release the data so the children can be found. HHS has admitted over 85,000 children they've lost contact with. That's what they admit. That's what they admit. They're losing track of 1/3 of every child that crosses the border. That's totally unacceptable. That is an F. These are children. Children. Release the information so the children can be found. My appeal is find the children, rescue the children. It's unthinkable that there are children right now who need help. They're in crisis and no one is coming for them because HHS is holding the information hostage.
Tara Rodas, thank you so much for coming on Rising to tell us more about the situation. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for shining a light. Thank you.
Michael Tracy is an independent journalist known for contrarian observations on Twitter that often defy conventional right-left thinking. And he just upped his odds on a President Biden withdrawal to 30%. We were talking about that on social media the other day. In a recent tweet, Tracy wrote, quote, yes, a 3-point lead likely puts Trump ahead in the Electoral College, but with the level of Dem hyperventilating going on right now, you'd think Biden had utterly and fatally collapsed. This has him well within the margin of error. Now, Tracy, who was once a correspondent for the Young Turks and a columnist for Vice, now writes at Substack. He's been critical of mainstream media, of aid packages to militaries overseas, of allegations of collusion between Trump and Russia, and he says he doesn't support the Republican or Democratic Party. We actually have that in common. Tracy also recently called out the squad, writing, quote, the squad position that Biden is both complicit in an ongoing genocide and totally fit to serve another 4 years as president is really special. So we're going to begin doing a new series here at Rising with more in-depth interviews with social media personalities, people I've interacted with in the past, and people who I think our viewers would benefit from hearing more from. And we're going to kick that off with Michael Tracy, now in studio. Welcome to Rising, Michael.
Hello. I guess I should change my title to social media personality. That sounds more dignified.
Does that sound? I don't know if that's
more than
insult
journalist
or a compliment.
More than journalist, yeah.
Well, let's start with what you observed about the squad, because I've been saying this too. I was actually surprised, and I didn't know that AOC was capable of shocking me anymore by her level of behavior, but I was surprised that like the only people not turning on Biden right now are like the squad progressive people, despite having been, as far as I could understand, the most dissatisfied with him over the course of his presidency for the perceived betrayals on like student loan debt, on the Israel policy, especially in the last couple months. But at a time where everyone is calling on Biden to drop out, and not literally everyone, but the pressure is mounting, the AOC people are actually the most loyal. What's going on with that?
Well, Bernie Sanders as well.
Yeah.
Bernie Sanders has been unusually vociferous in defending Biden's continuation in the race. I'm not particularly surprised by it. Basically, the instant that she entered office in 2019, AOC assiduously acclimated to the Democratic leadership structure in the House. She wasn't throwing bombs. She wasn't trying to hinder any kind of conformity within the caucus. She was trying to habituate herself into the mainstream of the party. Because, that's a fairly wise strategy if you want to ascend through the ranks. And she has a safe seat in New York City that probably she could have until she, reaches Dianne Feinstein's age if she wants and croaks in office. Let's hope that doesn't happen anytime soon. Even
when she reaches the age at which you run for re-election, when she gets into her 70s and 80s.
But by that point, they'll probably be like accustomed to remain in office till like you're 110 or something.
People will just be floating brains in jars like in Futurama running for president.
So I'm not particularly surprised by it. Yeah, she did somewhat accentuate her rhetoric around the Israel issue because she has to manage a couple of incentives within her personal coalition, including the activist left, the DSA types, who are obviously very strident on the Israel issue. So she kind of threw them a couple of symbolic bones by calling it a genocide, which I don't really think amounts to much substantively. It's just a way for people to get people riled up. Now, you can have strong critiques of the Israeli war effort, of the U.S. policy to support and subsidize and facilitate the Israeli war effort, but just to scream genocide doesn't really accomplish much other than getting everybody emotionally exercised. And that's what AOC specializes in. Symbolic displays that convey a certain emotional tenor that don't actually do anything substantively. So the biggest tip-off with respect to her and Biden was a couple of months ago, after AOC came out with her stunning declaration that she considered what was going on in Gaza a genocide. She then appeared for a campaign-style appearance with Joe Biden, where they're wearing the aviator sunglasses together. Senator Ed Markey was there in this little trio selfie that they took. And nobody really thought to think for a second, wait, didn't she just necessarily accuse Joe Biden of facilitating and engineering effectively a genocide? Because who's doing it if not Biden, the one who's supplying all the armaments? But I don't know if AOC doesn't really delve into the issue on that level, or she just has probably a cognitive dissonance that just allows her to maintain uneasy equilibrium among these rival dynamics and coalitional considerations that she has to manage.
It makes people think that politics is all theater. That when the representatives yell at each other on the floors of Congress or in oversight hearings or meetings, they get into it, they shout at each other. Cameras are rolling. You got to get your clip for your base, whatever it is. I mean, I've experienced this once. I testified before Congress on on hate crime statistics and how I thought it was going to be bad to create like a new terrorist designation for the so-called white nationalist hate crime type people. And AOC was, one of the whole squad was there on the Democratic side. And it's like you get the same question from each person because each person needs that clip of them saying, what are we going to do about terrorists? No matter if it was already asked, because they're not substantively trying to get at any truth. They just need that clip of them to show to their donors and supporters that they're motivated on that issue. Then the cameras stop rolling. It's over. They don't care. It's like totally performative. And that's what I think, and that's probably what most Americans think has largely captured our politics.
But that's another great example of the lack of principle. I mean, there are a handful of members of Congress who adhere to some semblance of principle. AOC might in her own mind believe that she's adhering to principle, but if she's questioning you or anybody at a hearing and bloviating about the dangers of terrorism, obviously inflating a threat, and therefore, by extension, advocating for the empowerment of the security state agencies to combat terrorism, because in this circumstance, it's against, the extreme right or domestic terrorists, white nationalists or whatever, but she doesn't have the foresight to realize that that power, once entrenched, could be used against Muslims or some other form of extremists, including left-wing extremists, who maybe should be more inclined to defend. That speaks to just a shallowness or a superficiality that I think is kind of unique to AOC and the squad. Now, that said, there are times where she has some, she can be deft, she can be skillful. I think she's actually a good performer. But when you're seeking to rise through the ranks of like a House leadership structure, obviously principle falls by the wayside. Thomas Massey's probably the most classically principled member of the House right now. And he's like one of the very rare few who doesn't seem to just act fully in service of advancement. He actually prioritizes principle, but that limits his ability to wield power.
Yeah, and engage in performance.
Yeah, exactly. But AOC, I mean, in a way, I mean, there is a logic to what she's done with Biden, because clearly now she has greater influence than you might have expected from 81. I mean, there really are an odd pairing: 81-year-old Biden and what is she, 34-year-old AOC. Seemingly from divergent ideological wings of the Democratic Party. But if your whole mantra or your whole ethos is just to, coalition build in service of the party, then any principled divergences or any principled tensions can easily be resolved. That's just the politician's way. I mean, the irony with AOC is when she ran in 2018, she at least gave the impression that she was going to be, this thorn in the side of the Democratic establishment, no business as usual. She did very unusually win a primary against a long-established Democratic incumbent, but I don't think she had the kind of baseline principle yet. I mean, she was very young, not that a young person can't have a principle, but she didn't really have a whole lot of experience to give anybody confidence that she could endure the pressures that would be upon her as a member of Congress who is seeking to be within the mainframe of a party leadership.
There's lots more to come from this conversation. We're going to release the rest of it over the weekend, the full interview there. So if you're enjoying this discussion, make sure to tune in then. We'll continue with the rest of it on the weekend.
Alec Baldwin's Rust trial started Wednesday. The actor faces one count of involuntary manslaughter for fatally shooting 42-year-old cinematographer Halyna Hutchinson nearly 3 years ago on the set of Western film Rust. At the heart of this case, did he pull the trigger or did the gun misfire? Baldwin says no. He's maintained his innocence all along. In opening statements, prosecutors attempted to paint Baldwin as reckless. Prosecutor Belinda Johnson had this to say. Let's watch.
When someone plays make-believe with a real gun in a real-life workplace, and while playing make-believe with that gun violates the cardinal rules of firearm safety, people's lives are endangered, and someone could be killed.
Now, on the other hand, the defense argued that the film's armorer and the first assistant director are the ones to blame, saying the gun shouldn't have been loaded and it passed through their hands before getting to Baldwin. Alex Spiro said, quote, "This was an unspeakable tragedy, but Alec Baldwin committed no crime. He was an actor acting, playing the role of Harlan Rust. These are not cardinal rules on a movie set." Baldwin came into this case with a win in the pretrial hearing. On Monday, the judge ruled that the actor's role as a producer of the movie could not be presented to the jury because it's irrelevant to the case. Now, that move was a setback for the prosecutors, who were expected to say that Alec Baldwin bore responsibility for ensuring safety on the set because he was the co-producer. Now, the trial is expected to last 8 days, and if convicted, he could get 18 months in prison and a $5,000 fine. It's unclear whether Baldwin will take the stand. So, this case has attracted significant national media attention. Obviously, a tragic death at its heart. The dysfunction on the set of this movie has been pretty well documented. I do, for what it's worth, from what I've read about it, it did seem that the significant fault did in fact lie with the arms specialist on the set, who was very inexperienced and very
I think she was
careless.
Overworked, and she was doing multiple projects. I was a public defender in a previous world, so this falls a little in my alley. Mm-hmm. I'm really surprised that they charged Baldwin in this. I get that you're never supposed to point a gun towards someone, but this wasn't supposed to be a loaded gun. This was supposed to be a prop. As someone who has been a gun owner before, and I feel comfortable around guns, I would treat a prop gun in a movie very differently than a loaded weapon at a gun range.
Right. What the prosecution has to demonstrate is that he should have known it was loaded, or that he... Now, them taking out from the case the fact that he's the co-producer, I think does damage the case, because I could see the argument that he was responsible for making the set be safe. I mean, when you're, even when you're using prop weapons, you got to have safety standards, and that is the job of that person on set, the armorer.
Exactly.
So again, I do think the principal blame clearly lies there. If you were to say he is somewhat at fault for how chaotic the set was, how overworked the person was, could be civilly liable.
For sure.
To be criminally liable, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's a real attenuated circumstance. And if you're going to start holding producers criminally liable for anything that happens on movie sets in Hollywood, can you imagine?
Well, yeah, but people don't usually die on set. I mean, somebody died here, right? That's not a typical circumstance.
It's not a typical circumstance, but I mean, there's a reason you hire the armorer, and they're responsible responsible for handling weapons. Whether it's a gun or a knife or whatever kind of the weapon is on set, they're the person responsible for it.
Yeah.
Baldwin, I think this is more of just the media landscape and a prosecutor trying to,
And the armor, by the way, was convicted.
She was.
Yeah, she was sentenced to 18 months in prison. So, that's the one who...
They got their pound of flesh.
So this is...
The question is this movie going to come out?
I don't think so. This movie will never come out.
You don't think it'll ever come out?
I don't think so.
Somewhere in some back random website, this movie's gonna come out, and I wonder whether people are gonna watch it just for the weird kind of backstory to it. It's almost like, remember The Crow?
What?
Remember the movie The Crow?
I don't.
Okay, so back in the 90s, there was a movie The Crow. The main character died in a similar instance, and the movie was still released. It was Brandon Lee, who was the son.
Oh, I did. Yeah, I know about that.
Yeah, and he died during the filming of the movie in a very similar circumstance. The gun fired and the casing hit him.
Yeah.
And he died.
Okay.
And now it's a cult movie.
I've looked it up. It's listed as an upcoming American Western film. The release, Rust, is scheduled to be released in the United States.
It'll do better than Kevin Costner's
First look was
Western.
released on January 2nd. I guess it is still coming out.
See?
How about that?
It's going to be a little morbid, but people will show up. I guarantee you. People will show up to watch it.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of people calling for Alec Baldwin's head, maybe in right-wing world.
Yeah, I mean, the Trump
such
stuff.
an obnoxious kind of anti-Trump person.
And he's not even someone Democrats really want to defend. I don't think he should be criminally held liable.
He seems like a very, very obnoxious person.
Remember the voicemails?
The voicemail.
Yelling at his daughter.
Not a classy guy, although it might be a great actor.
He's done some great stuff.
Particularly loved him. And actually, he's played one of the most compelling major Republican figures in fiction, which is Jack Donaghy on 30 Rock.
30 Rock's a classic. My wife just binge watched me through it.
I've re-binged it a couple times.
So, what's going to happen with Alec Baldwin?
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't think he'll handle
I think he's going to be
prison very
acquitted.
well. Yeah.
That's what's going to happen. But
we're going to have to wait and see.
Will he return to making movies is the big question. Because I don't think he's been...
If I was Alec Baldwin...
He's been laying low.
Yeah, if I was Alec Baldwin at this point, I would take my money and I would go to some island somewhere and just enjoy life. I don't understand these people who at this point have made this much money. He's now on trial for involuntary manslaughter. After this... What do you do?
You are useless, Alec Baldwin. Did you see that movie?
So I think he's going to come back. Maybe he'll come back as Trump on SNL in the fall.
He was not very good as Trump, I didn't think.
You didn't like it?
Oh, I found it totally not compelling at all. Who played Trump before him? It was Daryl Hammond.
Yeah.
That was good. It was a little subtler.
Yeah.
Alec Baldwin was just doing the most obvious kind of... There was no finesse to it. It was lazy. I did not think it was a good Trump impression at all. I think Daryl Hammond was way better.
Well, it's going to be interesting because you got Alec Baldwin, and you got to figure out who's going to be the new Biden. This whole Hollywood scene is just going to be...
Biden's not a fun person to make fun of in that context
because
it's just kind of sad, and he doesn't
it's
have...
like beating up on your grandpa.
He's not enough of a character, I guess. He's just kind of an ordinary person. What's his face, who does Bernie Sanders from Curb Your Enthusiasm?
Oh, Larry David.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
That's great. But Bernie's a funny, and Trump, who I know a lot of people hate, but
he makes for good TV.
He makes great TV. His faces, his mannerisms, the way he talks, it lends itself toward parody. It's true of Bernie Sanders too. True of they've done some good characters. Joe Biden is just boring to. He's boring to watch. It's boring to watch someone pretending to be him.
It's tough
There's nothing
to watch.
To it.
I cringe when I watch it because it's like watching a parent get older. It's like watching someone suffer through it.
Yeah. All right, we shall see what happens with Alec Baldwin. If there's any interesting updates, we will let you know in the future. But as for right now, that does it for us today on Rising. Rising Fridays will be on tomorrow, so you won't want to miss that. Thank you so much for joining us this week, Michael.
It's been great. Thanks for having me.
All right, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. See you next week.
Take care.